Okay, notebook check, stupid face check, Big Trouble in Little China, mouse mat check, flux capacitor, fluxing. Where was I? It's good to be back, everyone, to do another horror detour video for the channel. So, horror detour, for those that aren't aware, is my little vloggy thing show. It's not a show. Vlogs, me talk, camera, me speak, bad English, forget it. Anyway, October is upon us. I can't believe it's October already. And that means one thing, it's 2 months till Christmas. No, that means one thing, it's nearly Halloween. And of course, on Ghastly Tales, we couldn't let that go by without celebrating it a little bit. So there will be some videos around the Halloween time, but since we're kind of early-ish October, I wanted to ask you what your go-to movies are on Halloween. Which films do you sit down and watch each Halloween just to get you in that spooky mood for the evening? For me, I've broken this down into, and I have some notes here, into 5 categories. That sounds like a lot, but I'm just picking one movie, maybe two, per category. These are just little suggestions if you haven't seen them. You may have seen many of them, but I would love to hear which films you like to watch on Halloween. The first category is the slasher film. Thought I'd get this one out of the way. It's pretty obvious that watching John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978 is a great go-to movie on Halloween. Gets you in the mood. Set in this small town in America, follows the whole babysitter urban legend, which I think this film didn't create, but I certainly think it perpetuated some of that, some of the stories we hear about babysitters being preyed upon by masked maniacs. And it also has Donald Pleasance in it, so you can't really go wrong. It's a story about a person who's been in this, I think at the time you'd have called it an asylum, this psychiatric ward, Michael Myers, who escapes, and it's about the doctor or the psychiatrist who deals with Michael Myers trying to track him down because he believes that Michael Myers is evil personified. What really sets this movie apart from most slasher films is that it has this building of dread. The shape, as Michael Myers is often referred to, is often seen in the background of shots. It builds this idea as well, the way it's shot, of being watched. In fact, there's kind of an early, I don't think it's exactly Steadicam, but it's a sort of precursor to it, the opening of the movie, where you're seeing everything from the killer's perspective. And also you've got Jamie Lee Curtis as the babysitter in this film, and she's just fantastic as always. And in fact, she's in more than one film on my list for this video. So Halloween is an obvious one to go to because it's set at Halloween. Another one that I would recommend for this time is maybe something like Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th has more of a summer vibe to it, but the original movie I think is a lot of fun. It's real campy. It's not. It's nowhere near as good as John Carpenter's Halloween, but it does have some amazing moments in it. It has some twists and turns, and it's probably, in some ways, it's maybe more responsible for the slasher craze that you saw throughout the 1980s, especially spawning so many Friday the 13th sequels. Follows the killer Jason Voorhees, who has a supernatural element to his character, walks around in a hockey mask, much like how Michael Myers in Halloween walked around in a William Shatner mask, would you believe, that had been bleached white. And so Friday the 13th is great fun. It's got Kevin Bacon in it. That's worth your time alone, surely. And I would definitely recommend it for Halloween. I remember when I was about 12, I think, we got it. We rented Friday the 13th, and I had my friends round after we had we trick or treated. Yeah, we were probably the last year, one of the last years that we trick or treated, and my friends came round, and everybody laughed at it. They didn't enjoy it. They just made fun of it. But I was kind of engrossed by it because I knew the whole. I'd watched later Friday the 13th films, and the whole thing about the masked killer with the hockey mask, that actually develops later on in the franchise. So it's kind of interesting to see where it all comes from and how that kind of famous attire sort of evolves throughout the next few films. But anyway, so Friday the 13th is worth your time. Black Christmas is a great one. It actually comes before Halloween. Was made before Halloween. But I'll do a video on that because that deserves to be spoken about at Christmas. So that's the slasher films. What type of slasher movie would you like to watch on Halloween? I'd love to hear your opinion. The second category I've just kind of put down ghost. So anything that's like a haunted house film or anything that involves spirits or hauntings or any ghosts, anything like that. So my go-to movie is The Fog, 1980, John Carpenter. This is the film that introduced me to John Carpenter's work. When I was a kid, he was one of the first names that I learned of where it was like, oh, somebody made this. Someone makes films. They're not just windows into another reality. Someone actually makes these movies and tells these stories. So as a kid, John Carpenter became incredibly important. Watched a lot of movies I should not have been watching at that age. That's my dad's fault, but God bless him. And but The Fog is one of the best American ghost stories on film. It's about a small town, San Antonio Bay, which is going to be celebrating its 100th anniversary. And on the night of its 100th anniversary, something terrible comes through the fog from the past. It's really an ensemble film. It's got Jamie Lee Curtis in it as well, Tom Atkins, a number of really great actors and actresses. It's got Jamie Lee Curtis's mother as well, who's the star of Psycho. And it's eerie, but it also has a solid part to it. It's kind of almost got a slasher element to it as well in some ways. So it's a sort of strange mix of that. But I love this movie. It's one of my favourite horror films of all time. Carpenter considers it to be a minor film in his filmography, but I don't. I think it's one of his best, and thankfully over time I think more and more people are kind of coming to that sort of way of thinking. So The Fog is great to give you that little chill, and it's a fascinating watch as well and beautifully shot. So I would recommend the Fog. Other ghost films or haunting films that I may go to, well, I've spoken a lot about the 1963 version of The Haunting, Robert Wise. I put that up as potentially the greatest horror film ever made. People talk about The Exorcist, they talk about The Shining. Absolutely great argument for them as either of those is the greatest horror film ever made. But I think The Haunting deserves to at least be put on par with those films. It's based on the Shirley Jackson novel, The Haunting of Hill House, which recently was made into a Netflix series. And the Netflix series really blew me away. Actually, I mean, I know one of the writers on it, but despite that, I was a little bit worried about what they were going to do with The Haunting of Hill House, because I love the book and I really love the film, the original film. We won't talk about the Liam Neeson remake. And so, but the Netflix series is really worth your time as well. It's fantastic. But anyway, on Halloween, sometimes I'll watch The Haunting. It's shot in beautiful black and white. It's about a paranormal investigator who invites a handful of people to spend a few nights at this allegedly haunted mansion, Hill House, and he does that by selecting people who have had supernatural experiences in one way or another. So that's what that film's about, and the film kind of delves into the history of the house, but also the history of the people. It's very frightening. It's psychological in nature as well. You don't entirely know what's really happening, I think the suggestion in the book, the suggestion is that there may be no ghosts, and that what happens may be brought about by the character's history. But in the film, I think there's definitely something supernatural happening, but it may be magnified by the presence of these characters. So The Haunting is one that I would definitely watch on Halloween, quite often late on. I often think that black and white makes a more effective image for the horror genre, but that's just me. So this is one of the best. So that's my ghost or paranormal choice, would be like The Fog or The Haunting. I've got the next category as monster movies. There's some phenomenal monster movies. You could include something like Dracula, Brides of Frankenstein, all the Universal stuff. But I've actually chosen the 1987 film Monster Squad, partially because of nostalgia, but also because it's a great rehash of those classic monster movies from the 30s and 40s, the Universal horror movies, and even, I suppose, in some ways you could say by extension, the Hammer films in the late 50s and through the 60s. But Monster Squad revolves around a group of friends who are kind of obsessed with all things horror, and they are a group of kids, much like kind of the Goonies, that sort of age, in their early teens, maybe a little bit earlier than that, round about that age anyway, and they happen to be present when Dracula is amassing the forces of darkness to try to bring around some sort of apocalypse. It has Wolfman, it has the creature from the Black Lagoon, it has the Mummy, it has Dracula, it has Frankenstein's monster, it has all these things. It even has Van Helsing, and it's great fun. It even has an important moment in the middle of the film where there's a sort of ruining it for people that haven't seen it, but there's an elderly neighbour who I think the kids are kind of frightened of at first, but he later on becomes a pivotal character in the story, but he tells the children when he's at the door talking to them that he knows what monsters are, and as he closes the door you see that he's got the brandings from Auschwitz on his arm. So it's quite it's really serious moment and quite an important point in that movie. It's good fun. It's cheesy. It's 80s. If you like Stranger Things now, I think it draws from things like Monster Squad. Maybe it's not as good as the Goonies and some of the other E.T. and those sorts of movies that were around in the 80s as well, that treaded some sort of similar ground. But I love the monster design, and I thoroughly enjoyed this film as a kid, and I still enjoy it now, and it's great fun. So as a monster movie on Halloween, I don't think you can go wrong with watching the Monster Squad. It's not frightening. If you're looking for a really scary monster movie, I would go elsewhere. But if you're just looking for a good bit of fun, remember, horror doesn't always need to be scary. The horror genre can be fun and comedic as well. Evil Dead 2 is one of my favourite horror movies, and it's hilarious. So anyway, that's the monster category. If I was going to watch a monster movie on Halloween, I might also watch Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, something like that as well. Which, again, a lot of nostalgia for that movie because it used to be reran a lot on television when I was a kid. It used to be shown in the mornings during summer holidays and things like that. They would show all the old Abbott and Costello movies. And that one's kind of like Monster Squad as well. It's got loads of the different monsters in that movie. The next category I have is anthology. Couldn't read my writing there for a second. I love anthology movies. An anthology film is also known as a portmanteau or manteau film, and basically it's a film with shorter stories in it with a wraparound. So one of my go-to ones always is Creepshow, written by Stephen King, directed by George Romero. Fantastically captures the essence of the old EC Tales from the Crypt comics, which I love as well, and it has this garish comic palette from that era, and it has the sense of fun as well. Those comics were always extremely visceral, and they have a lot of fun with gore, and Creepshow kind of does the same as well. You can just tell that everyone on that film is having an absolute hoot. Um, it has people like Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson in it. That's one of my favourite segments in the film, actually. The crate is I think the best overall segment in the movie. I think that's quite a frightening story. The wraparound is, I'm talking about Creepshow, and I've put that poster up just for this video, by the way. I have to say, you may have noticed that I used to have this in the other room when I used to make videos from in there. I had to take it down because my daughter would see that, and as much as it's good fun, she's a little bit too young for that yet. Although she loves creepy things already, like all the books that she likes, things with monsters and stuff like that. So chip off the old block. But anyway, yes, Creepshow is definitely worth checking out. But you probably have. If you're going to watch an anthology film that's really related to Halloween, then Trick or Treat by Michael Dougherty. It was made in 2007. That's a film. Every now and then you watch a horror movie and you don't know an awful lot about it, and it catches you by surprise, and you're pleasantly surprised. I love the anthology. I said that like I'm French. The anthology. I love the anthology genre. Trick or Treat 2007 actually feels very much like a spiritual successor to Creepshow, and it's all based in the one town on Halloween, and we see various stories played out, and some of them are quite creepy and a lot of them are fun, and it's very well made, and it's just good fun. So I would definitely recommend Trick or Treat as well on Halloween, especially if you're looking for a film that's Halloween related. So that'd be my anthology pick. If you're looking for other anthology horror movies, you can't go wrong with the old Amicus films. They made a ton of anthology movies and they're all great. From Beyond, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, special favourites of mine. The last category would be, I've just called it classic. Most of these films are classics, but it's a little bit older. In fact, I say a little bit older. It's the same year. I've just realised that the same year as The Haunting. So it's 1963, and it's The Raven. I may have talked about this on the channel before. It's one of my favourite films. It's directed by Roger Corman. It stars Jack Nicholson, Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, and it's all these classic horror actors, and Jack Nicholson right at the start of his career. And to see Boris Karloff and Vincent Price and Peter Lorre all playing off each other, they were in other movies together as well, but this is definitely one of my favourites. What Roger Corman did throughout the 60s was he adapted a bunch of Edgar Allan Poe stories, normally very loosely, and made films out of them. Mask of the Red Death is definitely worth your time. That's a great one. Most of them are really enjoyable. And he made them on the cheap, but they're really well made. And The Raven is just pure fun. It's based on the poem that Edgar Allan Poe wrote. Poe considered it to be his masterpiece. I think Poe did actually some better poems than The Raven. I still love The Raven, for Raven fans out there. But the film The Raven is very, very, very tenuously linked to the actual poem. It's about a man who is essentially was like a sort of wizard or occult practitioner. He loses his wife and he's kind of moping around his house late at night when there's a storm outside, and a raven comes tapping at the window. The raven ends up talking to him. It's Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre has been turned into a raven by another sorcerer, and he's come to Vincent Price's character to ask for help so that he can turn him back and then help him go and face down this evil sorcerer. It's actually a fantasy horror movie. There aren't a ton of those, but it feels like a real adventure. They go on this adventure. They go through the night on a horse and carriage, and um, the evil sorcerer is trying to take over their minds, and then they get to the castle, and the sorcerer, played by Boris Karloff, of course, he tries to, come off as just charming, and of course he's not doing anything terrible, but really he has this secret plan. But anyway, it's great. It even has a showdown. There's like a magical duel. If you imagine like the old westerns where you'd have people facing down each other, it's like that, only it's with magic. And you've seen this obviously in Harry Potter movies and things like this. This is a version of that in the early 60s. Yes, it's campy. It's meant to be campy. It's meant to be fun. But I thoroughly recommend it. It's just great fun. So that's The Raven from 1963. But you could pick, there's so many classic horror films. If you want a silent one, can't go wrong with Nosferatu or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Excuse me, that's easy for you to say. So that's the 5 categories that I'm kind of talking about. Like for Halloween movies, I've made this really convoluted. So slasher movies, Halloween, Friday the 13th on Halloween, can't go wrong with them. Supernatural films, The Fog and The Haunting. Monster movies, I would say Monster Squad, maybe Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Anthology films, Creepshow, Trick or Treat. And if you want something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, it's a classic movie, you can't go wrong with The Raven. So that's my picks for Halloween. What are yours? I would love to hear what you're going to watch on Halloween, or what you would watch on Halloween. Or maybe you'll be too busy doing something else. That's fine too. But I really hope you do have a great rest of October. But I will be back before Halloween, so don't worry about that. So I just want to say pleasant evening, unpleasant dreams even. And no, have a pleasant evening. Have a pleasant evening, then have unpleasant dreams. And then a pleasant morning. I went all Bob Ross there for a second. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye for now.